All right, to carry on from where we left off. Right, so we're talking about what the British had done, right? And we're looking at what Templar had done. And also, I've mentioned about how they utilized, not utilized, sorry, they basically offered rewards to the communists and the people as well. So it's not just to the communists, but also to the people to basically, how do I put this, to what's that word? I can't remember that word. I'm looking for that word. All right, basically, you have to sabo the communists and to out them as communists lah, so that you can gain some form of rewards, right? Okay, so the next thing that Templar did also is to announce the plans, the British firm plans to actually establish a united Malaya. You can say that ever since the Federation of Malaya, they have been those were actually plans as well to guide them towards independence. But when they announced these plans, it's basically like telling the people of Malaya, here we have a proper plan with a proper timeline, and this timeline will lead you to independence if you follow exactly what we say or something to that extent lah. So basically, when they announce plans for independent Malaya, the communists have nothing else to fight for already. Okay, I mean, they can fight for maybe faster independence, but it depends on what the British timeline is. Basically, it would actually do still make the communist aims to make an independent Malaya redundant. So, right, what he did, other than to introduce these plans, is to also introduce local elections. So, what local elections mean is to mean to say that elections at small levels, not nationwide. So, like for example, the Bukit Batok by-election will be considered a small local election, and he would extend citizenship to over half of the Chinese population. Now, basically, what this does is that if you were a Chinese, all right, if you were a Chinese, you would have a tendency to support your fellow brethren Chinese, and that would actually be in the form of the MCP, right? However, ultimately, you got to realize that if you are living in Malaya and you are going to be part of Malaya and you want to stay here forever and you want to have a good life, you need to support the people who would be able to guarantee that. And when the British extend citizenship to you, it means to say that you are now part of Malaya and can call it home. Why not? So they would be the better ones to support rather than the MCP, right? So when extending citizenship to over half of the Chinese population, it made the communist fights even more redundant. Okay? Now, the second point here, member system was introduced to the Federal Legislative Council to allow more locals in the politics. And the third point, nominated local council members were trained for administration to prepare for self-government. Basically, it's calling for more people, local people of Malaya to participate in civil service. Not to be a teacher like me, but basically in other areas of work, like for example, Ministry of Health, you need somebody to do the admin. You basically getting more people to work in there to form part of the government. All right, and finally, the last point here, federal elections were announced to the Malayan people for greater participation in politics. Federal elections means to say the entire Malaya at that point in time would be allowed to vote Now, so what all these things did, right? What the British fight with the communists essentially did was to actually speed up the timeline for Malaya's independence. So if you ask the question of how did the communists allow Malaya to gain independence? Okay, think of it as a SEQ question. The communists were responsible for Malaya's independence. Then you would need to actually say what the communists actually did will be a description of everything that I've just mentioned, of course summarized, and then you got to explain to say that this actually helped to speed up the timeline for independence because they needed to counter the influence of the MCP who wanted a communist state, right? And at the same time, they also, the British, while they are announcing the plans for the elections, they also mentioned that they need to actually ensure that the Malays, or rather, sorry, the people of Malaya were ready for independence. And that means to say that they need to prove to the British that they can work together. So one of the British conditions for Malaya's independence was the ability of the different ethnic groups. That means to say the different racial groups to be able to work together. And this created the impetus for the formation of the inter-ethnic political alliance that is the UMNO-MCA-MIC alliance, that would be short form to be called as the Alliance. All right. So we can pause for this moment and think about, try to understand what have been done so far, what we've gone through so far. So what was the impact of the Malayan emergency on Malaya's political development? I've just mentioned that. So was the authority of the British colonial government over Malaya weakened by the Malayan emergency? If you think about it, not so much. And did the Malayan emergency give the Malaya leaders more authority over the government of Malaya? Yes, they did. All right, in other examples that have been mentioned just now. So finally, we'll move on to the second factor, which will be about the formation of the alliance and how they work together. So you would see this term coming up more. That is on the intercommunal cooperation, which means to say that you are working together across different races. So the word communal is talking about the different ethnic groups, racial groups as well. Okay, so the three parties, UMNO, which still exists today, MCA, Malayan Chinese Association, MIC, Malayan Indian Congress. Okay, they formed the alliance and they would be trying to convince the British that Malaya was ready for independence because of these individual parties. And so therefore, in 1955, there was elections in which these three groups, the alliance, they had an overwhelming victory of 81%. Yep, 81% of the votes that convinced the British that, hey, look, the people actually do support one particular political group. And this political group apparently is strong, is good enough to convince the people that they will be able to be a proper government after the British have left. So what this essentially does in the 1955 elections is that it convinced the British that, that the alliance were good enough to be able to lead Malaya to in independence. And so the alliance leaders decided to continue to negotiate for Merdeka in the next 2 years. Now, if you look at the textbook for this on page 39, you will see even more examples of how the UMNO MCA alliance, first of all, they won 226 out of 268 seats in some particular election. And it really shows you how strong they are and how many people do actually support them. Okay, so the details you can read, and the understanding here for you is that with them being able to prove that they are able to work together with different races, the British will be more convinced to give them independence. Okay, some definitions here. If you need to, you can pause and read through them. So it's a bit weird in the organization here. Wait, let me move on to this one first. So what else did the alliance do? Because we're still on the factor of the alliance. I know that in the textbook they talk about this as the establishment of an independent Malaya, but it is still things that the alliance did. So the very first thing that they did after the 1955 elections, okay, they went on this mission to London, to the British, to ask and press and persuade the British government, to grant independence to Malaya. So basically in 1956, they got the British to promise that they will grant Malaya independence by August 1957. In that 1 year, which is actually pretty fast and pretty a great achievement for them. And also, in accordance with granting Malaya independence, it also means to say that the British advisors have to withdraw, right? And also the second point here, the second sub-point here, appointing a constitutional commission to draft a constitution for self-government. So a constitution, as I've repeated many times, is basically like a set of rules, a sort of laws that the country follow by. Okay, so Singapore, we have our own constitution. Malaysia, they have their own one. USA, I like to quote this a lot. The USA's constitution states that you have absolute freedom of speech or something to that extent, and which everybody, well, to me, seems like an abuse of the freedom of speech lah. But basically, that is their constitution, and for us, our constitution would probably have mentioned something about no saying of no bad mouthing of the other races and the other religions. So this Merdeka mission is just simply a mission. There's not much impact, but the fact of the matter is that they got the British to promise their independence in 1 year. So what happens next is, as you can see, since they need to draft a constitution, right? They need to write out a constitution. The British appointed somebody to do it, and I think it's William Reed, was it? I always cannot remember the name. Yeah, William Reed. Yeah, Lord William Reed. This guy, he set up the commission, and that's why it's called the Reed Commission, to basically submit a report to the British government on the recommendations of this constitution for the United and Democratic Malaya. And in this constitution, it would include things like the preservation of special rights and privileges of the Bumi Putera, which is basically the son of the soil, or it means to say that they must have certain rights reserved for the Malays people. So the alliance did not agree with some of the recommendations, and Tunku Abdul Rahman and another delegation again went over to London or to Britain to contest the recommendations. And the recommendations by the alliance was after that accepted. So let's take a look at some of the recommendations by the Reed Commission. So on the left, as you can see, is the recommendations by the British people that Malaya should be a secular state. But for the alliance, they felt that, since you needed to defend the rights of the Malay, yes, Malaya can be a secular state, but Islam is to be recognized as the official religion of Malaya. In comparison, Singapore, we don't have an official religion, or rather, if we do, we will recognize all the official religions that there are, just to achieve religious equality. Okay, and the second factor here on the other than the Malay language, English, Chinese, and Tamil would be the official languages of the first 10 years after independence, would mean that all these languages can be used in government and law courts, but they decided that only Malay and English should be the official language, and Tamil and Chinese would not be used first, but they would be used later on. Lastly, dual citizenship to safeguard the rights of non-Malays. So they were in consideration of the Chinese and the Indians. So like, let's say if you're a Chinese living in Malaya, you can have Malaysia citizen and also China citizen. Just in case anything goes wrong in Malaysia, you can go back to China, right, where you originally belong. But they didn't want to have dual citizenship as do Singapore, so that we keep our people here. Right, if I allow some people to have dual citizenship, then in times of trouble for Singapore, these people will just escape to their second citizen country, and that's something that they didn't want. So these were recommendations from the alliance, and all the recommendations on the right from the alliance, as you can see, they were all accepted. What this means is that the British actually trusted the alliance now enough that they recognized that they would be able to make decisions on their own. And so finally, in 1957, Malaya became independent, according to the timeline that they have asked for in the Merdeka mission on 31st of August. All right, so some of the other definitions, okay, you can pause the video to look at them if you need to. Okay, this is on Bumi Putera. Secular state, if you have no idea what a secular state, okay, basically is a state that's not connected by any religious authority. What is this thing? Is the position of the head of state of Malaya. So the common SEQ question, the easy one, would be this: alliance was the main reason that secured Malaya's independence in 1957, and how far would you agree with the statement? All right, and I actually do have this slide. So we have completed this section of it, and this one is in the part 1 videos. So actually I have finished this thing already. No, in half an hour, no less. So that's actually quite fast. Please again seek to understand the content about what we're talking about. If you don't understand, please look for me for a consultation and try to understand first rather than just memorizing everything. I have tried my best to make it as easily understandable as I can. Please support all whatever that you have heard here by reading the textbook as well. So support your own knowledge by reading the textbook, so as to you are clearer in understanding. There might be one or two things that I have not emphasized on here in the video that can be found in the textbook, so please go back to it as well. That's equally important. And do your own revision, and please try to understand the content, okay, more so than anything else. Don't just memorize, but understand the content and what we are doing here. All right, so that's it for the end of Malaya. I will be preparing for the Vietnam one soon.